Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Roy Prasad. I'm the Group MD and CEO of WorkReady Asia and Educate You. Thank you for joining us, and more importantly, we're delighted to have Mr. Chris Hodder here with us. Chris is an industry specialist in Australia. He's the lead corporate advisory consultant with decades of experience across multiple industries. Particularly with professional services, financial services, and health and well-being, along with hospitality services. So join me in welcoming Chris to our brief talk this afternoon. Good to have you here, Chris.
Thank you, Roy. Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be in KL for the first time.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, so we're going to keep this fairly casual and have a bit of a discussion about the Australian Immersion Pathway, which is a unique pathway for Educate You and WorkReady Asia. I'll welcome any questions that you may have and explore further.
I suppose that the first thing, Roy, is I've done a lot of consulting and coaching within various industries throughout Australia, and you'd recall some time ago, we had some meetings in Geelong in the health services sector looking at supplying personnel into their hospitals. And one of the big challenges that came up was that there was some potential concerns amongst some of the nurses and specialists there of the need for the workforce to be able to communicate effectively. And I understand that there's some strong criteria around that. And I'm wondering if you could probably help us to understand why do applicants need to take the OET?
Absolutely. And Chris, I remember that visit very well. To Geelong, we also did Bendigo as well. And there are two responses to that. One is that the Australian federal government made some significant changes, and the changes were around mandatory testing for English, and you know, people are raising questions about the need for it. The need is industry driven from a occupational health and safety perspective. It amazes me to try and explain that the use of the English language in the workplace, it's not only about being understood, but it's actually about being understood for the right use of tools and the right use of hazards, etc. And at this point in time, occupational English and general workplace business English is mandatory in Australia. That without that, you aren't granted not only you aren't granted employment, but you cannot get a visa without it. So
because my understanding too is that it's not just about being able to effectively communicate with your peers and your colleagues, but there are some risks of not being able to interpret documentation, instructions from your bosses or your supervisors. What kind of impact can that have in the workplace if you don't understand what you're meant to be doing?
Absolutely, and I remember a classic example in an aged care facility. There was a lady who was attending a night shift, and for this particular patient, there was clear instructions written that there is no solid foods. Unfortunately, the person working, and this is pre the legislative changes. Unfortunately, the person working did not understand that and gave the patient solid foods, which in actual fact caused greater harm to the patient because this patient was only able to digest liquefied food. And sadly, the outcome was not good. So that's a classic example on why there's a mandatory requirement for English, and also specifically for allied health and nursing, why the requirements are so much higher.
Absolutely. So just being able to understand the language or communicate to a minimal standard just isn't going to cut it in a lot of these industries. So is the OET equivalent to the IELTS, or will applicants need to take that separately?
It's actually integrated together, and that's the beauty about it, is that the IELTS with the OET from a general business English perspective. And what we've done is we've customized it into an Australian structure. So, I think the world knows we speak a different language and we speak a different English. So what we've done is taken the standardized British Council or Cambridge English, and on top of that, we've Australianized it so people understand the colloquialism in Australia. You know how important it is to be in a workplace in Australia and to be able to understand terminology that is localized to us. So,
I think you were telling a story to me earlier where you made a comment to a staff member and she thought she was going somewhere when she wasn't.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely spot on. I remember years ago, I had a staff member, and I walked into the room and I said, "Morning, how's it going?" And she stood up and she literally asked me where she was going. And I mean, those are the little nuances that is so important.
That can make a big difference in an environment like health or mining or construction, where a simple misunderstanding of what's being asked of you or said to you can make a huge difference.
Absolutely.
From a safety perspective.
Yeah, and for a fact, having consulted across hospitality, even property, etc., construction, right? Some of those tools are dangerous, right? I mean, seriously, some of those tools use explosives. Even within a healthcare setting and environment, just the little things of ensuring that medication is given or care is given, or the ergonomics is communicated.
Yeah. Well, in fact, I have a very good friend of mine who works in mining. He's a health and safety officer in Perth and FIFO roles. In fact, just last week, he had a foreign worker that couldn't understand the instructions on some sort of glue gun, and kept trying to operate it and hadn't read the instructions properly, and it exploded. Damaged his eye through his glasses, and he's had to leave the site. And now, as a consequence of that, they're going to do to retest him on his skills when it comes to understanding and interpreting the English language, which is, it's unfortunate for him, he might lose his job, but it's also unfortunate he might lose his eye, and that's by not understanding simple instructions. But let's talk about workplace certification. What is it? And why is it significant for applicants from your perspective?
The allied health sector from NDIS and aged care, prior to 2024 and 23, we all were able to work in the sector. In 2023, there was a aged care Royal Commission that was handed down. And NDIS went through an audit, and now from 2024 onwards, it is mandatory for anyone who wants to work in aged care, dementia care, or NDIS to be certified and to have what is called a certificate 3 in individual support, disability, or aging. And the joke is, you and I could have been sitting in a restaurant or a pub 2 years ago on a Friday, and we were probably, two average blokes who had nothing to do with the industry. But on the Monday, if we decided to, we could go and work in Allied Health. We could go and work in aged care or in DIS. And the requirement and the cleaning up through the Royal Commission has now provided a fair and equitable mandatory requirement for the workplace that we must be certified. So this is where we are looking for people that have come from a counseling background, physiotherapy background, dietitians, osteopaths, pharmacists, and by giving them the Australian certification, they can openly work for us, and they can openly work for WorkReady in Australia, in both those sectors of disability and aged care.
So obviously what you're saying is it is mandatory. Does certification provide any advantages for things like career progression?
It does, absolutely. Coming in after the certification, you're probably starting at a level 3. From there, so what we've done is we've combined it with an MBA program, so that gives people some form of business knowledge. And you understand, for us in Australia, we want people to be business savvy. We want people to understand what it means to be working in an environment in Australia, so that people are cost conscious.
Yeah. And look, certainly from my perspective, having consulted to many professional services firms, financial services firms, small business, understanding culture and understanding how you can have a high performing culture, whether it's in health or other areas. But let's, Roy, on workplace certification, the pathway through WorkReady Asia, what does that look like and what does it mean for applicants?
Chris, with the significant changes made by the Australian federal government, and international student routes are capped, etc. So we've created this immersion program that allows candidates to come to Malaysia, do an affordable, internationally recognized MBA with Australian certification. And they end up working for WorkReady Asia in Australia. However, what is really important is to understand that by having this pathway, not only does it allow people to be gainfully employed and earning a significant amount of money, but it actually supports them on their journey to permanent residency as well. Whether it is to Australia, or whether it's to New Zealand, or whether it's to Canada, because permanent residency depends on skills assessment. And the more qualified you are, the more skills points you get. So this here is a perfect opportunity for young people to position themselves to get ready to be in a country like Australia that allows them to have immense opportunities of career growth, etc., and walk in with certification that is mandatory for the industry. So, it's a win-win on multiple layers.
And this program hasn't just been designed for Southeast Asia or other parts outside of Australia. It's also attractive to Australians as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. Australians itself, they themselves have to, if we want to work in aged care next week, we have to go and do the same certification.
And you have Australians actually doing your online.
We have students from Perth that are currently our students. We've had students historically from Sydney that have been students of Educate You. So we have students from different parts of the world. So it's not only focused on the subcontinent or Asia. As you know, the challenge we have in Australia is big, and we are open to applicants from all geographies.
Yeah, and it's a globally relevant program when it's been developed to get people to Australia, but Australians are wanting to be a part of it as well.
Absolutely.
So that's huge kudos for that. When we look at the recruitment program, is it officially accredited? Are you licensed to recruit candidates for employment in Australia, outside of Australia?
Very good question, Chris. To be a labour firm in Australia, you have to be licensed. And WorkReady Asia, I'll be very open about it. And we spent a considerable amount of time in Melbourne. It was an investment of over a year for WorkReady Asia, myself and my co-founder. And you can imagine, this is a government state regulated license. The iterations of audits that we went through, and then finally, it was it was such a celebratory moment when we were granted our labour hire license for Victoria and for Queensland, for that matter. And aside from being granted the license, I really want to take this time to emphasize the rigor of regular review audits that has to take place. In addition to that, we have mandatory monthly reporting to the state government on every person that we have. So the compliance regulation requirement is not only a government regulated requirement, but it then also spreads out to what cover audits us. We need to have sufficient public liability insurance, indemnity insurance, etc. So yes, in answering that question, we're a licensed organization in the states of Queensland, Victoria, and we extended to New South Wales, and we've held our labour hire licenses for 2 years plus, right? So we're very, very lucky to be granted this. However, the biggest asset for us is under Immigration Australia, you have what's called the labour hire agreement stream for aged care services, right? So if you are applying for a job with a company that is not in aged care and wanting to be in aged care and you're wanting to go through immigration, they need to be part of, one, holding a license, two, using the labour stream, and immigration will then review it. So WorkReady Asia has its labour hire licenses, and then we conform to the requirements of the immigration for the labour agreement. So
it's one thing, from my perspective, when I've experienced what WorkReady Asia is doing, it's one thing to cover off the things you need to do, which is, are you able to recruit people? Do you provide the right certifications, English, all that sort of stuff? But one of the things that I was really interested in the time we spent in Melbourne a while ago was that it's what's really exciting is the stuff that you want to do, not what you need to do, and that's creating a home away from home and the welfare of the people that you're recruiting and placing into roles and the experiences that they endure on the ground and making it feel like a home away from home. Can you talk to that?
Absolutely, Chris. And then that comes from my experience of 5 years prior to WorkReady. So I managed a considerable number of foreign workers, and your statement is absolutely pertinent that creating a home away from home is so important. When you're leaving your home and you're traveling thousands of miles to go to a foreign land, right? One, you don't want to feel lost. You don't want to feel alone. You don't want to feel alienated. You don't want to feel as though you've got no one to turn to. So what WorkReady Asia has created is this ecosystem. And this ecosystem of welfare, well-being, where we provide shared housing. It's modern. There's Wi-Fi. There's furnishing. There's linen. There's so every comfort that you want is there. And more importantly, because it's shared accommodation, the people you are there with, you studied with. So you formed a relationship. You formed an alumni as such. And it just benefits everybody.
Shared cooking, but also things like transport. You're telling me the story about how you created some software or program to identify the most efficient routes and accommodation, and maybe you could
absolutely. And Chris, valid point on providing that comfort level to candidates, because the last thing we want is candidates to come to Australia and then the hassle we have with traffic and where you live, right? If you are commuting an hour to your job in Australia, that's considered to be normal, and you're paying exorbitant amounts of toll, etc. What we've done is we've mapped out localities of the positions that we have with our roles, and then centrally focused on the accommodation. So at any point in time, the candidates travel maybe 10 kilometers at maximum. So they're saving time. And also, if they're doing shift work, the last thing you want is to come home late and have to travel an hour to get home, right? So we've made it as helpful as possible,
efficient as possible for them, and as comfortable at home when they get home as possible as well.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's WorkReady Asia and our immersion, and more importantly, I'd like to thank you for your time, and I hope you watching have found this to be informative and of value. We can't thank Chris enough for his time, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Look forward to working with you further over the coming years.
Indeed. Thank you so much.